Namaste, everyone. It's an honor to be part of this uh, conclave, the Cultural Economy Conclave, and I'm glad to be sharing my thoughts on the idea of dharma and its importance in both economic and socio-economic policies. I'd like to thank Saurav Pandeyji, who's been a good friend of mine and who has been a pioneer, I would say, in terms of understanding or facilitating such discussions, especially on the cultural economy. And his work and what ITC does, the India Think Council, is indeed commendable. Um, as part of this discussion, I thought I should start on a couple of overarching points on the idea of dharma and its role in socioeconomic policy. Um, Often, most of the research that happens, especially in India, in Bharat, except for the last few years, has been concentrated, um, especially on economics through a completely Western lens. And I think that that's a narrative that needs to shift, especially for a civilization such as ours, which is not only thousands of years old, but steep um, um, in its in the amount of thinking and research that has been um, produced in the past. So I think for this to sort of mainstream, there are two things that we need to look at. First, how do you know, bring about a proposition based on dharma and its linkages to sustainability in terms of research. When I mean research, credible, solid research, um, how do you sort of bring about a proposition, which means a framework, an economic thinking, in some cases, data to back it, and how do you sort of build credible research? That's one. The second thing is how do you sort of establish a time series because a large sections of what we look today has an inspiration from somewhere else. Modern day capitalism, for example, is sort of inspired from the Protestant ethic. So how do we sort of establish through this research a long time series, based on these dharmic principles and its association to socioeconomic policies? So a large section of my research is based on this, and in these two segments. And I've been doing this for many years. And one important part of this research is on Kautilya's Arthashastra, which is, as all of you might know, it's a third century BCE text. It has about 15 books, about 150 chapters, and about 5,000 to 6,000 slokas, depending on how you see it. So this book of mine, Kautilyanomics for Modern Times, tries to um, give an economic perspective to Kautilya's thinking. That's what the Arthashastra is meant to do, since it's in its name. It's called Arthashastra. So this book tries to sort of make an attempt to create an economic framework to Kautilya's thinking through the prism or new concept which I bring about in this book called Dharmic capitalism. So the idea of dharma being, beyond the state and the market, or crossing the binary between the state and the market, and serving as a foundation to economic policy, so that it takes off pressure from both the state and the market. Meaning, in any sort of macroeconomic policy, you either intervene at the state, you bring, for example, taxation, you invest in infrastructure, or you tweak some of the delivery mechanisms by the state, or you sort of deal with the market in the sense markets fluctuations and gyrations sort of help to boost the economy, and things like that. So Kautilya's proposition, which I illustrate in the book, is to have dharma as a foundational sort of element to this. So where a sort of a more dharmic society can inherently ensure that the state is, for example, less corrupt, and the state is, for example, more efficient. And on the market side, it could sort of deal with things like moral hazard, reducing propensity of corruption in the markets, and having a more sort of ethical based society, which makes the markets also more effective. So uh, this fundamental proposition of dharma being foundational beyond the binary of the state and the market is the base of dharmic capitalism, which I illustrate in the book. Again, dharma has many definitions, many contours, but for the simplicity of the discussion on this book and Kautilya's Arthashastra, I sort of review it through the prism of ethics, responsibilities, and sort of global harmony. And these three pillars are mapped to the bigger sort of entity of Kautilya's thinking, which is a rule-based but non-intervening state, which means a state which has rules and regulations but doesn't intervene and or micromanage like a socialist state, for example, and has strict rules and regulations that follow the rule of law. Two, this also maps to the idea of a sort of a globally engaging society. Vasudhaiva Kudumbakam in practice, in economic practice, which means engaging with the rest of the world in trade, and still protecting some of the fundamental things that we have, but engaging with the rest of the world on trade and commerce and things like that to expand the economic pie. And the last part of the mapping is on sustainable growth. The idea of sustainability. There is a chapter in the book which talks about sustainable growth, how Kautilya views societal responsibilities, family responsibilities, the idea of using these responsibilities to ensure sustainability thrives, and how a dharmic way of life sort of make sustainability an autopilot in a sense. How we sort of exhibit how the way of life itself is intrinsically sustainable. So that is the sort of third bucket which I refer in the book. So as I mentioned, we talk about ethics, responsibilities, and globally harmonious society, and that maps to ethics maps to institutions, clean institutions, clean leadership, and also uh, um, enforcement of rules, which is again an important segment of ethics, and harmony in terms of responsibilities we spoke about in terms of societal, familial, and community responsibilities, and also welfare. And lastly, harmony based on a global sort of an outlook, and social well-being. And all of these are mapped to the idea of rule-based yet non-intrusive state, a wealth creation via global outlook, sustainable growth and welfare. So this is the contours of what I define as, dharmic capitalism in this book. And each chapter sort of goes on into economic themes such as trade, inequality, labor contracts, sustainable growth, and debt resolution, even for say something similar to what we have in the IBC today, and a variety of economic concepts. And in all of these concepts, I think the idea of dharma as a foundational principle and its values is something which is resonating across the Arthashastra. And that is something I try to bring about through this book. But now to the broader idea of the discussion that we're talking about, I think it's important to bring through such research initiatives to sort of lay the context and lay the foundation for such thinking in a fairly robust and research driven manner. And I think both the idea of research, doing solid research, as well as creating a time series. So, example, in my sequel to this book, which I'm working on right now, hopefully it would be released later this in next year. I talk about a lot of these common era kingdoms, whether it's the Cholas, whether it is the Pallavas, and whether it is the Angkor kingdom in Southeast Asia, and all of these, and how some of these principles, economic principles, sort of have evolved in these kingdoms. And I think it's important to do this begin because it again establishes a time series, a longer time series, which is more than 1,000 plus years, um, in which a thriving civilization did not thrive because of an accident or some accidental population that they had, large population that they had, which is often the critique about ancient civilizations is it's because there was a consistent amount of thinking, there's a consistent amount of thought process on economic policy. And I think that led to marvels such as, for example, the Brihadishwara temple in Tanjavur, and the Angkor Wat temple in Cambodia, for example, and a variety of other sort of architectural marvels and scientific discoveries during that time. So, um, in summary, I would like to conclude by saying that I think it is very important for us to um, as part of this discussion, I hope the message that I would like to share is that it's very important for us not to stop with mere panel discussions. I think the 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 next step should be to sort of take this and move into more concerted time and effort in doing research, in exploring some of these old ideas, and bringing them, creating constructs, for example, creating ideas like dharmic capitalism for example, in Kautilya's case, in my research, and then testing these ideas in public fora, and then ideating and debating some of these ideas. And I think it's also important to establish a longer time series, or a period of time, to see evolution of these ideas. Because unless we produce, sort of research items, unless we produce content which is useful for the policymaker, in this case, it's very difficult for it to have the impact that we are seeking. I mean, it's good that all like-minded people in such a conclave, you know, uh, are discussing such ideas. But one needs to also understand that this is a group of people who are already sort of engaged in these discussions. But if you want to take it to a wider audience, and then you also want this to be relatable for a policymaker to explore, and use some of these ideas. And I think more and more research needs to come out, and more sort of collaborations and research ideas needs to come out. So I hope this conclave, kicks off some of these, pointers, which are ideas that I mentioned, and I hope in subsequent every editions we do have more publications and debate on the subject. And once again, I want to thank Saroji for providing me this opportunity. And while I'm not able to be there, I would love to be there for the next edition of the conclave. And thanks for all the esteemed guests and the honorable people who are there at the event for making this such a grand success. Dhanyavada. Thank you.